Welcome to The Digital Patient, where we discuss the latest advancements in digital patient engagement and share stories from the front lines. Today, we're joined by our very special guest, Andriana Lukich. Andriana Lukich is the Director of Digital Solutions at St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton. She holds an Honors Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, an MBA from McMaster University, a PMP certification, and is Pro-Sci Change Management certified. Throughout her decade of healthcare experience, she has held multiple roles, all focused on leading change initiatives and supporting staff through transformational projects. The digital projects she has championed include enabling virtual care between patients and providers, rapidly developing a COVID-19 screening tool for staff, patients, and visitors, creating a citywide patient self-scheduling tool to support booking of COVID-19 tests, and supporting the implementation of COVID-19 assessment centers. Andriana's commitment to digital transformation has attracted support and spurred innovation across Canada. We're super excited to have Andriana on the show today. Andriana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Alan and Josh. I'm looking forward to it.
Amazing. So, Andriana, where we wanted to start, I know in your bio it said you've worked for a decade in healthcare, but it's actually been over a decade now. And you've championed, various large-scale innovations like the ones mentioned in the bio, but then also implemented things like Epic and MyChart, which is called MyDovetail over at St. Joseph's Healthcare. Originally, you went to school for kinesiology. So my question to begin is, how did you end up in this world of digital health and innovation?
That's a great question. And, I think it was a little bit serendipitous, to be honest. So I did do my undergraduate degree in kinesiology and thought I wanted to be a physiotherapist until I got to my fourth year of rehab studies and realized this was not for me. I needed to pivot and see what else was out there. I knew I loved being in the healthcare space and I wanted to help patients and providers, but I just needed to find a different avenue to really put my skill set to use. And so I did pursue an MBA, and through the co-op opportunities that I had, I realized that I actually really liked the intersection of informatics and digital health, and found that I could provide value and also had a passion for the space. So pursued different opportunities at various hospitals and organizations and landed in the digital health innovation space.
That's incredible. Sorry, Josh.
Yeah, Andrea, I'm just curious, and I hope I'm not jumping to ahead, Alan, but I think for many years, informatics and digital healthcare was really focused on EMRs. That was kind of the main thing. At some point, it started to switch to more of the patient aspect of digital. Do you kind of recall when you started seeing that switch happen in the healthcare system here? Is that, I'm sure it happened pre-COVID, but how recent was that pre-COVID?
Yeah, great question. So honestly, Josh, I think in the last 5 years, we've seen the gradual shift. And I think with the emergence of new technologies and apps that have really allowed patients to empower themselves and demand more of those that are servicing them, we've seen that expedited. COVID for sure lit the fire even more into the innovation space and making that happen. But I think when we look at the quadruple aim of healthcare and looking at patient experience, that has been a focus that's been increasingly valued and made its way into hospital strategic plans. So I think in the last 5 years, I've seen it become a focus at various tables and levels of governance, and the belief that patients should be engaged in their healthcare and active, and that it actually leads to better outcomes, because that's what studies are showing, has become an increased focus in the last half a decade or so.
Are you still involved in some way with kind of some of the curriculum going on with some of the informatics programs out there? I wasn't sure if you were part of those at McMaster or something like that.
So I TA'd for many years at the DeGroote School of Business. I no longer do TA there, but I sit on a governing steering committee for Mohawk program in digital health. So it's a new program. And it's a great program. I'll do a plug for them. So they really are looking at all of the different skill sets that new emerging professionals need to have in the digital health space. So both the technical skill set that many need to have, or at least be able to understand to work in the space, but what are the soft skills that you need to, because digital health is not just about IT, just straight IT and coding. There are the components of understanding requirements and, building strategy and visions and being able to bring those pieces together. So yeah, I'm still staying engaged in some of that work, and we do have lots of learners support our project management office and our informatics team each work term, because I think learners have the best perspective and offer fresh insights and keep us innovative. We can get in ruts sometimes, and bringing in those new perspectives does nothing but benefit us in the long term.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Andriana, how has the curriculum changed over the past 2 years? Now that we're in this global pandemic, has that impacted any of the education that's being shared? Is everybody talking a little bit more about supporting patients digitally, or how's that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there for sure has been an increased focus on it's such a typical term, but patient-centered approaches to work. That's for sure still something that's emerging. I think though, the trends that are emerging even more strongly are related to cybersecurity and analytics. So, and empowering and helping us understand how we continue to support patients, but with access to information, free-flowing information being sort of the space that we're in, we need to make sure we're protecting that in a way that there is trust and assurance in how that information is being shared and accessed. And so seeing lots of focus in the cybersecurity space and analytics. So what information is available to us to actually continue to make really good informed decisions on how we deliver and support patients with digital tools. And how do we pivot if we've got it wrong? I think we can learn much quicker and understand what's not working with the data available to us, but being able to use the data to tell the data story and to make informed insights and decisions is an increasing area of focus for students in schools and also in the workplace in the day-to-day operations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's surprising me that cybersecurity, not just in healthcare, but just globally, is becoming an increasingly important field. I guess decades ago, all the battles were fought physically on the field, and now there's just so many battles happening digitally, which makes sense. You have to protect yourself even more than ever before. All your data is online. That's even moved into healthcare, so that's been pretty incredible of a shift. You've done a lot, and even just the past 2 years, but even before then, I know Alan's a resident stalker when we meet guests like yourself, and he found a great tweet from you in 2020 that he really liked, and the tweet was, change is the only constant, and being agile is so important. We live in the tech circle, and you're very much in the tech circle yourself, and so being agile often works in tandem with the mantra, fail fast, fail often. Have you always been wired this way to kind of be so adaptable to being agile and moving fast?
No, not at all. So it's something I struggle with every day. But I think, to your point, being able to fail fast, fail often, course correct, and do that within sort of the parameters of safety. So what are your bumpers that you've got in play? What are your risk thresholds? How do we take calculated risks so that we can improve and do it in a manner that isn't going to take 10 years is something that I've had to foster and work towards, but I've seen the benefit. And I know you've kind of got to live in the gray zone a little bit, and especially in tech and in the innovation space, to really make those strides and offer the best services and products that we can to our patients.
I love that. One particular innovation, Andriana, that you were really focused on prior to COVID, and to me, it's kind of amazing that, because this was 3 years before COVID, back in 2017, or I think that's the genesis of the idea, and then implemented finally in 2019, but video visits and virtual care, basically at a time when not a whole lot of people were thinking of even leveraging that technology for their patient population for various reasons. You had the foresight to really see how that would be beneficial for supporting patients and a system in Ontario. And so what foresight did you have back then that really told you it was important to develop that type of workflow?
So it's an interesting comment that you say I had the foresight. I think I supported some of the foresight, but St. Joe's really is a leading organization. And the clinicians there have supported our path, and they demanded of us options to be made available for them to support care for their patients in a way that their patients wanted to receive care that therapeutically was appropriate. And so we were very fortunate to work with the Ontario Telemedicine Network and be the first organization to be part of their partner video project, which allowed us to move away from the OTN hub technology as the only verified technology to use. And we were able to introduce Epic Zoom integrated workflows into our hospital. And so Epic is our hospital information system. We are a fully digital hospital, and our clinicians appreciate the electronic workflows and the electronic EMR that they have access to. But they wanted us to do even better for them, and they wanted an integrated, seamless experience for their patients and for themselves in delivering virtual care. And so having the opportunity to push that boundary pre-pandemic, to define the workflows, to understand what standards we would need to have in place, certainly set us up very well for when the pandemic hit and we had to ramp down ambulatory on-site care. In the span of 48 hours, the team was able to expand what was at that point in time 11 clinics using virtual care to having nearly 95 clinics adopt virtual care workflows, almost overnight. And we were able to support having patients continue to have their care. So I don't know that I had the foresight by myself, but I think understanding what was important to providing good care and being leading in the way that we did that did help us push the boundaries jointly.
I love that. I've never actually heard somebody say a digital hospital. Like, we have a fully digital hospital. That's like, it's outstanding to even think of that as a concept. And sorry, your growth there from 11 clinics to almost 95 clinics in 48 hours, that is an incredible amount of growth in such a short amount of time. I think I also heard, like, within the first 60 days of COVID, there was over 150 changes that was made from the digital perspective. Things like order sets and things had to be all changed rapidly. What were some of those major hurdles that you encountered to support that type of growth?
I think one of the most significant challenges we had was that it was the beginning of the pandemic, and we didn't even really know what this COVID thing was going to look like and how it was going to impact care and what the protocols would be. And so it became an exercise in really, really good, strong governance at a point in time when everything around us was chaos. Mm-hmm. And so changes to clinical systems, as you will both appreciate, are not insignificant. And the change control that we needed to have from a technical perspective was one hurdle, but the larger hurdle really was getting clinical decision makers to agree to what the workflow changes would be. For instance, thresholds for COVID risk, what would those be? How would we configure a best practice advisory to FHIR that met those thresholds? The evidence was emerging in the COVID space. And so informatics, being sort of the marrying of that clinical practice with digital tools, needed to be in a bit of a hurry up and wait formation. So as information came, we could quickly pivot and have the team configure the system to meet the needs of the clinicians based on emerging evidence and practices that we needed to follow.
When you go through that sort of explosive growth and almost this overnight adoption of innovation across the entire organization, I think one of the neat things is that maybe in the past, the team would have said, oh, there's no way we could do that. It's impossible. There's no way we could coordinate all that, et cetera. But then the moment you actually achieve that, you start to realize, wow, we actually can, accomplish something like this if we really wanted to, if it was important enough. And I was curious, since your team had to do all this so quickly, has that changed the culture around the next time there's a new innovation we want to do? We actually can do it, and we can actually go bigger, faster than we thought we could. Have you seen a shift in that mindset at all?
I think what we've seen is that there is a belief in ourselves that it's possible. I think we've learned that it's possible, and we've also learned what are those good checks and balances to have in place as we proceed. So back to sort of your fail fast, fail often, I think we know not every change we made related to COVID in the system was the right change, but we were able to assess and understand and think about what questions should we be asking ourselves on an ongoing basis if we're to actually make this a process and embed innovation in the work that we do it in a way that's going to be effective and mitigate as much misstepping as possible. So yeah, I think, and the belief of the team, I think, has increased. So where something maybe felt insurmountable before, now we kind of know, okay, let's take a deep breath. Here's the next request. We've done something like this before. What can we pull on? What are those lessons learned? And let's just kind of get it done.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm the kind of the person who thinks that whenever I'm in like a rough spot or a big obstacle, I always go back to, Yeah, but there was that other time that was way worse than this. And I got through that. I almost feel like COVID is one of those things for healthcare systems where like, yes, it's still going on, but you really got through the worst of it. You stood up this entire virtual visit system in the worst of it. And so like, no matter what comes up next, you always point back to it and say, well, we did that. It can't be harder than that. And we did it. So I just think it's unlocked so much, I think, understanding what's possible in these great organizations like yours. So, wow. Shifting gears a bit. I mean, so the reason that I guess we've got to know you, Andriana, is because of, you've been one of the leaders on the St. Joe's Hamilton SeamlessMD partnership. And so one thing I want to give your team kudos for was that St. Joe's Hamilton was the first in Canada to leverage our Epic App Orchard Fire integration to deliver a fully Epic MyChart / MyDovetail SeamlessMD integrated digital patient engagement experience. We've done some great work engaging patients pre and post surgery. I was curious about like how you think about St. Joe's Hamilton's kind of broader vision for the digital patient experience and how our partnership with Seamless fits into that broader vision.
Yeah, so we actually just finished prior to, we were hoping to release it this winter, but this fifth wave has stopped, but we revamped our digital health plan. So we have a 5-year digital health plan, and we spent a lot of time collaborating and with our clinicians in the hospital, with other provider groups, with administrators, with researchers, and of course with our patients and family advisors to understand what would be important. And you've kind of nailed it in the question. So it's so important for everything to be centered around how we support patients and having access to their information and empowering them to support their clinical journeys, whatever that may be, and making sure that we can provide effective, timely care. And so a really large focus for us has been, what is the patient digital toolbox? So I refer to it as a digital toolbox. And what can we put in their toolbox to equip them to be successful in being equal, if not greater partners in their care with their care team? And the SeamlessMD platform really provides just that. So you're right, I'm very proud, and thank you for the plug. We're the first Canadian hospital to integrate SeamlessMD with Epic's MyChart. And that means for our patients that they can log into one portal, they can see their meds, they can see their history, they can see their after visit summary that comes from their Epic chart, but they can also go in pre-surgery and complete their COVID screening questionnaire. And that can then go and get filed back over to the care team that can review that and make sure that all is ready to go for a day of surgery. And when they get discharged, they can again log in and they can see all of their pertinent healthcare information that's in our Epic chart, but they can also complete their daily questionnaire around their pain levels. And we, based on that, can trigger workflows back to the care team for follow-up support and remote monitoring. That vision of what the holistic patient experience looks like has been enabled, I think, in part by our partnership and our ability to think big and think smart. Like, what are the tools we need to make this experience easy? It's not about complicating things. It's what do we put in to remove barriers to care?
So Andriana, I love that term, the patient's digital toolbox. And I think one other plug I definitely wanted to give your team was your toolbox is, I think, one of the biggest in Ontario because you've been pioneers there. And so, St. Joe's, I think in the past year came out with your Navigator app, kind of like your digital front door. You're one of the first in the province to do this, not surprising. Do you mind sharing a bit more about your vision for the Navigator app? And because that also plugs into all your other tools.
Yeah, this is a good question. I've been in meetings about this all day, actually. So we love the Navigator app. So we have something called the St. Joe's Navigator. And what it is it's in collaboration with Identos. We've got an Ontario trusted account. So it's exactly what it sounds like in a front door, that a patient can log in once and have access to their various applications related to their healthcare journey. Also has simple things like tile access to things like how to get to St. Joe's. So anything that a patient would need or a family member would need to support a seamless and stress-free experience with their healthcare team. And we've tried to include in that Navigator. And so the vision is actually to expand that regionally and to understand how within each Ontario health team, so we're part of the Greater Hamilton Health Network, how we might create a front door of Greater Hamilton Health Network resources for patients that will access various services across their continuum of care. So St. Joe's, we're a hospital. Hospitals tend to be very hospital centric. So we've got all the good acute care sort of apps back there, but what are the home and community resources that we need to think about including in there for the patient that gets discharged from St. Joe's and goes to a long-term care home, or a patient who goes home and might be a Meals on Wheels patient. So we're starting to really understand health in sort of all of the different facets that health can be. So not just you have disease, you've come and you've been treated, but what would be important in a navigator to help you navigate all components of your health and wellness within your region. So that's where we want to take it. I have confidence in the team locally that we can do this. We've got a really strong digital health secretariat at our regional level here that's got the forward thinking mindset that we need to have to continue to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, that's some of the really neat things about Ontario, because we do work, in Ontario and Canada and the US as well. And in the US, they do have some very large health systems that have kind of consolidated. They do have maybe at the system level a similar digital health secretariat, but it's not ever really like an entire geography, for example, such as in Ontario. And it's typically not between health systems doing this together, but the fact that Ontario is this really unique spot where we are part of one, real provincial healthcare system, that you have that collaborative culture. That's actually been really neat. We don't see that south of the border. So that's really exciting. I think, Alan, you had some other questions about some of the other.
I did, yeah. So actually, surprise question, Andriana. This is just based on the idea of like Ontario really collaborating, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on how collaboration really pushes and drives innovation forward.
Yeah, so, and I would love to hear your perspectives on this one after too. That's a really interesting question. So I actually think collaboration drives innovation forward because it is the intersection of competing perspectives. And collaborators will almost always have heterogeneous backgrounds and perspectives, and bringing those various perspectives together usually results, if you've got good governance and good facilitation, in reaching an outcome that is richer or more positive than if you were to sort of endeavor by yourself or with a smaller group of like-minded people. But it's complicated and it's messy. And I think having to live in that uncomfort is a challenge for most people, and navigating that and remembering why you're doing it is often going back to sort of what the vision is for the group is so important. What do you guys think? I'm curious to sort of hear your perspectives on this one.
I think for me personally, in terms of collaboration in healthcare, I think we've seen this culture of, let's call it positive, healthy competition, where like folks like yourself, Andriana, of St. Joe's Hamilton, if you're learning, for example, what other groups here are doing with Seamless, especially if it's relevant to kind of your population or your work at St. Joe's, it's really positive for them to know, hey, actually, that's a great idea. So a good example is, St. Joe's being the first to do the Epic integration with us here. Other folks, as they kind of stand up on Epic as well, look to you and say, oh, wow, like that was done on Ontario, St. Joe's Hamilton. We should look into Epic integration with Seamless because your team kind of set the bar for that. And yeah, you were first, and not everyone can be first, unfortunately, but there are a lot of folks who also want to be kind of fast followers and early adopters as well. And it creates that healthy competition. So we found that to be really positive. Whereas I think in the US, it's a bit different, where there's a little bit of positive collaboration, but I think sometimes it's more like real competitive because, they are competing, they call it patient market share, which is kind of different than in Canada, which is more, I think here you're more competing on innovation, just more specifically, perhaps, than for patients. So that's a bit of a different culture shift, but definitely we're seeing that collaboration lead to at least ultimately better outcomes, even if the motivation is slightly different here versus in the US.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, obviously we are pro collaboration, but working with some of these organizations in the States, what we found that I think really, stood out to me as something I wouldn't think about is oftentimes there's very simple solutions that are maybe overlooked because we're thinking about, let's find the biggest overarching solution that we can implement. And sometimes just by collaborating, you can actually chat with, colleagues who are tackling similar problems, and you find that somebody solved a problem by doing something very simple. And it's maybe even not leveraging technology, but it's just a minor workflow change or things like that. So I think collaboration inspires a lot of ideas. I really love what you were saying about, populations coming together with all these differing opinions on the same issue, and you won't get that working in silo. And I think that's so important then for collaboration to drive innovation forward.
There's a really great book that I read. It's called, and I had to just Google it now so I can give you the tagline, but it's called Ingenious by David Johnson and Tom Jenkins. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I haven't read it.
So
I've heard it.
It's how Canadian innovators made the world smarter, smaller, kinder, safer, healthier, wealthier, and happier. It is a great book. And if you're like me and you need pictures when you're reading, it's got lots of really cool graphics, and it speaks to just that. Like, there is something in the Canadian mindset, not just in healthcare, but I think generally as a nation, where we are a very, very innovative group of individuals who have been able to come together and make healthcare better, and come up with ideas that have been able to be commercialized and have longevity and all that good stuff, and make us happier and kinder. I think it's really interesting to see how different groups do it, and you guys have the unique perspective of being able to work across borders and see that as well. So yeah, you should check it out if you've got time. It's a really, really good read.
I'm pretty sure you've tweeted about that book before, not to be so creepy,
but there you go. I love it. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. I'll tweet it to you. I'll have to find you on Twitter, and
That's great. Yeah,
I'll send it your way.
You don't have to. Alan already knows exactly.
Yeah. No, that's good. So, Andriana, what I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit, but pre-COVID, you had a digital strategy that was focused on, how do we really unlock the EMR and other technologies and bring them together to provide, what would be the future of healthcare. And in particular, you were looking at predictive analytics focused on early detection of sepsis, deterioration index, and risk of patient no-show. So those three categories. Now that COVID has happened and it's 2 years later, I'm curious, has that strategy changed at all?
No, that strategy is still very much in place, and we are working towards continuing down that pathway. So we sort of spoke about this a little bit earlier, but I think there's so much data that our EMR systems are collecting, and without having a really good solid strategy on how to use that data and actually impact clinical practice and care, it's kind of wasted. So I would actually say in the last 2 years, there's an increasing prioritization of continuing to work in the cognitive computing space and the predictive analytics space to support decision makers, both administratively and clinically, in their day-to-day and their long-term strategic decisions. We've used it during COVID. So we are able to look at inputs within our system and predict what our bed utilization will be day after day of ICU versus acute care for COVID patients. And so I have brilliant data scientists on my team who are able to look at the data and support decision makers and having them understand what we need to staff up for. So if we're predicting a large surge in patients in 2 weeks, how do we communicate that and make sure that administratively we are bringing in care providers to be able to support those beds and the care that needs to be had. So we've seen lots of use cases emerge for why cognitive computing and machine learning algorithms will continue to have a presence in the healthcare space. And I think more so, particularly now that COVID is here. We see it with surgical backlog even. So being able to crunch numbers and understand, when we may be able to ramp back up, when we may be able to move from urgent to non-urgent surgeries. We're using this data day to day to help decision makers make the best decisions they can.
Amazing. And just on the topic again of innovation, I know Alan dug up how I think you've talked in the past, I don't know, Alan, was it maybe a podcast or?
Yeah, I think there was a panel that you were on with maybe Can Health last year.
Okay.
I hope you memorize all your.
I don't, you know what? I don't know them as well as Alan does. It's very impressive.
So Alan found one where you were talking about making innovation a turnkey process, and you had a whole human-centered design framework for identifying successful innovation. And there were three main areas you talked about: desirability, viability, and feasibility. Can you share a bit more about, I guess, how you think about that model and what we can learn from a digital perspective from that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, and I said it earlier in the podcast, while we will, like, as a individual in the digital health space, it's important for me to know trends and understand where we can take this and be aspirational. But it's also really important to know what those that we serve are interested in doing. And so desirability is, what is it that people want? Like, where do they want to go? What are their priorities? How do we take that into account into our operational planning, into our project planning, into our strategic roadmaps, et cetera? And then really we get into sort of the feasibility piece. So can we do it? How hard is it to do? How easy is it to do? Is it going to take half of the resources I have on my team to do it? And is it worth it? So what's the viability? Based on all of that, do we think that long-term we're going to be able to make this work? Does it align with our strategic initiatives? Is it cost effective? These are the considerations that we need to really look into before we move forward with new work. And so innovative projects have to have viability. There has to be desirability, or if you build it, they're not going to come. You know, like we can make the best cases as to why they should come, and that's part of it. Change management is huge, and not everybody likes change, but if there's value in it that we can communicate, we can make it desirable, even if they don't quite know it yet. But all of those components are so important to look at holistically and together to understand if we should be proceeding down a certain path. Have you guys seen that? Do you see that with sort of your latest developments? So like at the Seamless team, when you guys are looking at sort of new functionality, do you follow a similar process, or how do you guys sort of dive into your priority areas for development?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty similar. And I think one of the things that we've really gravitated towards over the years, and this, you know, it's one of those things where it seems obvious now, but for some reason back then when you're really in the weeds, it's just not as obvious. So we have a very partner-driven roadmap, partner being our health system and hospital partners. So I would say over time, there have been a lot of things that we would brainstorm up internally, and like, oh, that would be so great. I'm sure, you know, Andriana and our health system providers will love this. But then often we're wrong, right? And I think in the past, sometimes we, you know, made the mistake of assuming too much about what's actually important and valuable to our partners. And so now we've really shifted gears where it's very much a partner-driven roadmap. You know, Colin, who's, you know, our technical product manager, I'm not sure if you've probably talked to him recently.
Yeah.
And so one of his things is to actually make sure that, you know, when we're thinking about new things, well, first of all, we're talking to you first. So that way you're telling us what are our priorities, what is your vision, and how can we build that into our roadmap to support your goals? Because frankly, you're at the front lines, right? We're really honestly behind the scenes. And our hope is that whatever we do can actually amplify the work that you're trying to do better. And so we can't just be making up stuff in a back room and just hoping that it is desirable, that it is viable and feasible in your environment. Because unfortunately, there's a limit to how much we can dog food our own product. You know, it would be great if we were a consumer product that we could just dog food internally. And if we love it, probably other consumers will too. Like, no, we work with hospitals and health systems. We don't live in your physical environment the way you do. And so we have to be really close to your team to understand what is desirable, viable, feasible, because without that feedback loop, we're gonna just work on the wrong things. And so we lean heavily on teams like yourselves to actually understand what is the right innovation to be pulled into the market. We just can't. In healthcare, you can't do that in a silo. I mean, unfortunately, the word silo is very common in healthcare, but we know, I think now that we just can't live that way.
You see that at all levels. So the way that you come to hospital partners to get the key trends at a hospital level in terms of what's helpful, it's really interesting. As you're saying this, we have an enhancement process at our organization just for informatics changes. So like straight EMR system changes. So we continue, I mean, innovation is amazing and we do all sorts of new things and we love to bring in new technologies, but we also want to optimize the tech we have in-house today. And it's amazing. We have about 400 enhancements that we do a year.
Wow.
And they go through they come in, they're logged through, our ticketing system, and they are what the end users say they want to do. And our team will review them holistically to, trend them and theme them, and then bring groups together to prioritize them. But totally get what you're saying, because sometimes I'll think something's really important, and then I'll go through the enhancement ticket logs and it's a reality check. It's like, okay, I thought I had a great idea. I was wrong. Oh, well, you've got to pivot and sort of listen to the feedback that you're receiving meaningfully.
Yeah, I think we've learned we can't be attached to our own ideas. It's not personal. It's really about what's going to be the most useful for, our providers and our patients. And sometimes it's not this idea that I thought was amazing, and that's okay. Maybe 5 years from now it'll work out, but yeah, maybe not today. And that's okay.
I think that vulnerability is what makes successful companies and successful leaders in the digital health space, for sure. Because sometimes you've just got to abandon what you think is the best idea ever and pivot and listen to what you're hearing.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, because especially in an organization like yours, where you may have some, let's call it, more resources than smaller groups to try and test new things. At some point, it sucks, but you have to eliminate some things that just weren't viable after all. Have you found a way to make that kind of failure okay and acceptable? It's okay to give up on this innovation, just didn't work out for us.
Yeah, so we have a corporate committee called Partnerships and Innovation that looks at frameworks that we can actually employ across not just digital, but any kind of innovation in a hospital. And I think the reason I'm referencing that is there are tools that we can use, to say, okay, we're sort of at a failure point. It's okay, let's move on. But there's also that embedded culture. And so I think hearing it top down, hearing it at all levels is helpful. So I have biweekly team meetings where members will provide, they'll give a presentation on what they're working on, and they may ask for feedback. And we'll often bring projects that didn't have the greatest endings forward as presentations as a team too, because there's something to learn from them, and understanding what those lessons learned are and documenting them. So I think, again, I'm a very process-driven person. Having a process in place when we've acknowledged and accepted that something didn't go as planned, and learning from it and putting it in a log so we can reference it when we start the next project does create a safer space for people where they feel that if a failure happens, it's okay. We'll move on. We'll learn from it. We'll do better next time.
That's
awesome.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know a couple of organizations who really take celebrating failure. I wouldn't say to an extreme, but they really try to normalize it. So I think Google has a page of all their innovations that have failed. So you would find Google Plus on there, and there's 50 different Google things that didn't work out that they just formally list and have pictures of, so that everyone is open about the failures there. And then I think it's 3M or some similar organization where I think you get a big cake or something to celebrate failure. If there's a big failure, oh, this product didn't work out. Okay, here's this big cake. We're all gonna share it together. I think it's 3M.
I'm not quite there in my professional development maturity yet, but I think that's a very cool way of doing it. And I mean, with my team, I hope they feel that they can say, "Wow, this sucks," because I am disappointed. It's okay to feel bummed out when something doesn't work. It's just important to know how to get yourself kind of back up, brush off the dust and the failure, and keep going.
And the other thing too is, if you don't fail some percentage of the time, then maybe you weren't going for something innovative enough.
I agree.
You weren't pushing the edge. So
100%. That's a very, very insightful comment.
I just stole it off a tweet from someone else. So
good.
I'm being serious.
Solid content curation.
Yeah.
If nothing else.
Definitely.
That's great. So Andriana, you've brought up a couple times now this team that you're working with. I think as a digital leader, you work with a very diverse team. So they're not, it's not just IT. You're working with clinicians, engineers, system architects. There's just a whole range of different people who you're working with. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on A, how do you ensure everybody has a voice? And then B, how do you determine which of the ideas that brought forward do you actually move forward with?
Yes. Okay. So let me answer the first part. So I am so privileged to work with people that are significantly smarter than me and have deep expertise in tons of different areas. And so the first thing that I have had to acknowledge and understand about myself as a leader is that my job is truly to be a servant leader. So it's how do I get out of the way of all of these smart individuals who have good ideas, and how do I give them the tools that they need to be successful? And what my job is to support them through the process to actually help them prioritize that work and get on, work plans that are going to be successful, as opposed to fail because there was lack of leadership support or funding or resourcing to make something work. So I've had the privilege at St. Joe's. I started as an analyst. And so I understand what analysts do and what their world looks like at St. Joe's. I understand what PMs do and what their world looks like at St. Joe's. I understand the thankless work of managers and what their work looks like, balancing both, the strategic direction from a director and also the day-to-day operations. So for me, it's really been about how do we equip all of these brilliant minds with the right processes and tools to allow them to shape sort of what this looks like, and marry it and have checks and balances with where we need to go as a department. From a prioritization perspective, it's a tricky one because there are so many inputs to what eventually leads to the output, which is your work plan. And so ideas from the team is one input. We've talked about the enhancement and request process. Ideas and inputs from our clinical and support service partners is another input. Ministry mandates is another input, or, priorities from provincial or federal governments are inputs. And so there's this ecosystem of inputs that we need to look at and put through prioritization matrices. So we do have, when it's new work, we look at different factors that are mapped to a decision matrix. We try to balance it so that all programs, different clinical programs, have opportunities to have their innovations or their new work put on the roadmap, and so that there's equity in terms of what we are actually tackling and supporting. And I think, again, it goes back to making sure that there's solid processes, that those processes are well communicated, and that there's buy-in that they work. And when they don't work, there's feedback so we can iterate those processes. My favorite word today seems to be the P word. Yeah.
That's great, though. It's obviously hugely important, and especially in times that are when COVID hit. It's like, if you don't have a process to fall back on, or you can't build a correct process, then you're lost. You're just completely without any direction.
And it can be boring. Like it's also not like the most inspiring thing to do, to create a Visio diagram of who to contact when something happens. But when it's there, then it allows that innovation path or the enhancement path or the break fix path, whatever it is, to be taken as quickly as possible. And that's what I see my role as being at this point.
It's a good process and a good playbook has so much leverage for everyone else on your team, because they're all able to just be so much more efficient what they do, because they're leaning on the process that you've worked out that works. It can't, you're right, totally can be boring.
It is. Yeah. It's not the most exciting.
Yeah. No. Well, and I think oftentimes it's built from failure as well, right? Like a lot of the times you'll come up with a process because there was a failure that had happened and you didn't make sure it doesn't happen. So it's also kind of standing on the lessons that you've learned in the past and sharing that throughout the organization. And when you're in an organization that's, St. Joe's Hamilton size, it's huge, right? So yeah. I think one thing we'd be really remiss if we didn't bring this up in this conversation, but we wanted to talk to you about interoperability. This past year, you were instrumental in contributing to Ontario Health's the official virtual visit standards. Could you share why it's important to have these digital standards in the first place?
By the way, Andriana, another unglamorous, important contribution to digital that you're doing.
Yeah, the technical standards are so, so absolutely, I can share why I think it's important. And it goes back to the P word, which I won't say again, but really, when you do have standards, it puts you in a place where we can create, we can share, we can integrate data across multiple systems, multiple applications, the continuum of care, in a way that the data is actually represented accurately and is interpreted correctly. So it's so important in the business that we're in that this data is not being misconstrued or misrepresented. It speaks life and death often, and it's so important that we get it right. And so standards really, from my perspective, they reduce the time that we have to spend cleaning data, translating data, figuring out how to make data across, in this, this sense, interfaces or translation engines or whatever it may be. And so to me, it's just another step towards efficiency and accuracy to let, clinicians do the work that they're supposed to do in a way that's not difficult for them, and to make sure that patients can get care that's really going to be the highest quality possible in the timeliest way with no barriers to access of that information. Yeah, standards, they're not overly sexy, but they're important.
Super important. Yeah.
So I remember when we first started, it seems like many years ago, we didn't have any provincial standards for digital and security and interoperability. And so we would always have to go hospital to hospital to hospital. And then everyone felt like they were doing it themselves for the very first time at each organization. And it was funny because back then we would always say, well, wouldn't it make sense for like a province like Ontario to have something like this? Because you actually can, centralize that design process of the framework. And you finally made it happen. People have been talking about this for a long time. So kudos, I actually made it happen.
We did it in the virtual visit space, and it's, the province, so the ministry has done some amazing work. I'm sure you guys are very familiar, but to the individuals who are listening, the Digital Health Information Exchange Policy from the ministry, so the DHIEX, it's a really great document. It's got awesome guiding principles and standards, and the vision of an interoperable health system in Ontario, I truly don't think is that far away. We have made huge strides in this province in the last few years.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The last question that I have before we jump over to the Fast Five is if you could give advice to any digital leader in healthcare regarding adopting a telehealth strategy or a digital patient engagement strategy or a digital front door strategy, what would your advice be?
Yeah, so I would say make sure that you're aligning your digital health strategy to the strategy of the organization for which you work for. So digital health plans are enablers to larger strategies. And I think understanding and recognizing that will make you so much more successful in the long run. And spend the time it takes to go out and solicit the feedback that you really need to make an informed decision on what your priorities will be. Speaking less and listening more is so important. And it's a difficult skill to just sit and listen and absorb and translate what you're hearing into potential action. But I think in today's evolving digital health space, it's such an important skill to have, and being able to do those few things, I think, will set you up for success in whatever that digital health plan ends up being.
I really love that point about aligning the digital strategy with the overall organizational strategy. It's one of those things where that way you're not, I guess, just doing digital for the sake of doing digital. It actually ties into a priority that everyone is working towards anyways. So it sounds very simple, but it actually is probably harder than it sounds. It's so important. I mean, even here internally, I think what we found is we have to be aligned on, the teams can't just do random stuff that doesn't actually connect to the overall organizational objectives. It's hard to get people moving in one direction already. So that makes a lot of sense.
And there's so much, there are so many cool opportunities in the digital health space that you do have to align, what are we looking to achieve here, and how is it tying to our guiding sort of principles or our North Star? Yeah. It's not easy to do, but it's an important exercise to undertake.
Yeah, totally agree with that. All right, let's jump over what we call the Fast Five lightning round. This is basically just 5 questions to get to know you a bit better for our audience. The first question we have, and you may have answered it, I'm not sure, but your favorite book or book you've gifted the most?
So I gifted, and I have it sitting on my table here. So I'm reading it actively, and it's another picture book, if you will, in that there are lots of, I'll show you, hold on.
Is this Brene Brown?
Wait for it. It's Brene Brown. Okay. But lots of, for those who have short attention spans, lots of visuals. So Atlas of the Heart, which is her newest book. I gifted it to 3 of my managers for Christmas. And I do find her reads are easy. Her books are very easy to get through. And I find that they're very tangible in that I actually can take something away that I've learned from her and action it. So this one's pretty cool. It goes through the 87 emotions and it maps meaningful connection in the language of human experience.
Wow.
So again, in this concept of us being in the digital space, it's not just about, the hardware and software and infrastructure. It's how do we bridge those human connections? And so it's a pretty cool read. I would recommend it.
Yeah, that's great. I think it also ties in really well with what you were saying earlier about failing fast and failing often and being vulnerable about, being okay with a failure and not, shying away with it, just getting back up. And I think Brene Brown probably talks a lot about that.
She does talk a lot about that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Question 2. This one's a bit more specific for you, but do you prefer 7s or 15s? And 7s. Okay. I thought you would say 7s. And then the second part B to that question is, do you think 7 should be its own game?
That's a hard one. So, yeah, I do. But I mean, 15s is also a great game to watch. So they have time and place for both, but 7s is so action packed and quick, and it's very, very entertaining to watch.
Yep, I agree. I think for folks listening on the podcast who might not know what we're talking about rugby. And I think, Andriana, you played rugby throughout your school and growing up.
Played it in high school, loved it. Yeah. No longer the rugby athlete that I might have once been, but I do like watching it, and I got pretty into it this summer with the Olympics.
Yeah, awesome.
Oh, so Andriana, I have an Easter follow-up question.
Yeah.
So we did talk to some folks in your neighborhood to get some suggested questions. So we talked to Dina Burnett, who I work with closely at St. Joe's Hamilton, and she knows you're a big football fan. She said you're a big Argos fan. She said we should ask you about the CFL versus the NFL. Which one's better?
Oh, I'm a diehard CFL fan.
Wow, really?
3 downs forever. So Dina, who yes, I'm working very closely with, and she is a Tiger Cats fan, and I am a Toronto Argos fan. And you can imagine how difficult it's been for our working relationship to accept this rivalry, but we've overcome the adversity of her picking the wrong team to cheer for, and we continue to have a successful relationship. However, I will watch the NFL gladly if there's no CFL on. So I had a busy Sunday
like yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
And did you enjoy the 4 downs?
The 3 downs makes for more entertaining football. I'd be happy to get into this. We could book another hour session just about. Well, you know what? Let's spend one more moment on this.
Sure, yeah.
Wouldn't we have all enjoyed 2 weekends ago seeing overtime CFL rules as opposed to overtime NFL rules for that Buffalo game?
What are the overtime CFL rules?
So overtime CFL rules, each team gets the opportunity at least once to get down and try to either have a field goal or a touchdown. Those of you who watched the NFL game know that the coin flip, if you based off of if you flip and you are the first team and you actually score a touchdown, it's over. So the other team doesn't even have an opportunity to respond.
Oh, I see. So let's say you're in the CFL and the first team gets a touchdown, then you could come back and you still get a touchdown.
And you could, if you scored a touchdown, then it would go back to the other team again. And you'd keep going until somebody finally had fewer points.
Yeah, that seems fair.
Yeah.
I think they'll be revisiting that in off season for the. We'll see what happens.
That's great. All right, question 3. It feels like we're on question 17 now, but question 3 of the lightning round: would you rather have super strength, super speed, or the ability to read people's minds?
Super speed.
Yeah,
and I don't really know why, but that's calling me.
It's great. Good for rugby.
Yeah. Question 4: what's something in healthcare you believe that others might find insane?
So I like to read my horoscope daily. I tend to believe it. I read it. I think astrology in general probably has no scientific evidence, but it's a fun little daily activity that you can read and take what you will with it. I suspect that there are some doctors and researchers who I work with who would not approve of this practice.
But did you read your horoscope today? And if so, what did it tell you?
I did. I have this app that is overly complicated and tells you all sorts of things. It's called CoStar. So you can check it out, but it gives you daily updates based on, so today I have power and routine, spirituality, social life, and self. And I've got pressure in thinking and creativity. So it's
That's this
basically telling me
podcast,
today,
maybe.
yeah, maybe. No, hopefully not. So it gives you all sorts of little tidbits. And I think
That's cool.
people can take what they want away from it, but it's a fun little, I do that in a Wordle every day now that we're
Wordle.
still in this
Oh my God,
never-ending
yeah.
experiment.
That's taken over my life.
I got on it. Yeah. No, that's
You do
great.
today's?
No,
I did do today's.
You?
Yeah.
Alan, how did you do? How many did it take?
It took me 3. So
Oh,
I
you
actually
beat me.
did. I
You
did
beat
really well
4.
today. Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah.
It's impressive. Josh, you'll have to report back to us via email.
I know. There's a lot of pressure. I have to get it within 4 at least right now.
It was.
Yeah.
I know it was a hard one because my partner actually took all the way to like 6 to get it. So
It was a
challenging
tricky
one. Yeah. But anyways,
Well, you're a Wordle whiz.
Yeah.
Good.
I think this is my 3rd day playing, so it's like brand new to me. I'm not.
I'll send you an archive link then after.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know
I
that.
was sent it actually earlier. My sister sent it to me. We're all on the Wordle train.
Yeah.
But you can do all the previous
Oh,
ones
that's
if
cool.
You have a
definitely
lazy
will.
Saturday. Yeah.
Exactly. Or right after this podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Days gone.
That's great. Last question that we have, Andriana. This is a pandemic lockdown related question. What's one hobby or activity you've gotten into since the beginning of the pandemic?
So I am one of those people who purchased a Peloton bike right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I have to say it was a good activity to get involved in. It's been a great outlet and has helped me focus on, wellness and feeling good. And it's when you don't leave your house, it gives you somewhere else, a different corner of your basement to go to have the workout. So I've stuck to it and there's a lot of content and I think you guys would agree, they're a tech first company really. So I've been interested in them just because of how they sort of run their business, and they've had some missteps lately, I would say, forgetting that they're a tech first company, but yeah, that would be my one activity I got really into.
That's awesome. I think there's been a couple guests on the show that Peloton's what they got into. That was their activity. That's awesome. Andriana, it's coming up to the hour, so I want to obviously cut it to be mindful of your time, but thank you very much for coming on the show today. You've shared a lot of wisdom with us, and I hope it translates for our audience to take away little nuggets that they can. But thanks again so much for coming on the show and just being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was fun. And it's nice to just catch up and chat sometimes and not be in a work-driven agenda mode. So appreciate you guys having me.
Likewise. Wait, this doesn't count as work for you? No, I'm kidding.